Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive, you know, going beyond the surface into the
Yeah.
psychological meaning of some stories from the Bible.
Okay.
You're interested in personal growth and societal issues and understanding just what it even means to be human, right?
Great.
So we're going to look at how some of those, really old stories might actually have some pretty surprising insights for us today, for navigating modern life and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, these narratives, they've captivated people for centuries. It's really quite fascinating how they can still kind of resonate with us, on such a fundamental level.
That's like they tap into something universal,
Yeah.
like something about the human experience that we all share.
Yeah.
So to kind of unpack all of this, we're going to be diving into Jordan B. Peterson's lectures,
Okay.
the ones on the psychological significance of the Bible.
Yeah, his approach is really intriguing. He kind of moves away from religious doctrine and analyzes these stories as reflections of the human psyche. It's like he's using them to understand how our minds work, why we behave the way we do, and what it actually means to live a good life, a meaningful life.
All right, so let's get into it. So Peterson, he starts off with this, pretty mind-blowing concept. He sees dreams as the birthplace of fully formed ideas. So he's suggesting that our minds, they're always watching the world, processing information, subconsciously in the background, and then presenting these, synthesized ideas to us through dreams.
It's like our brains are working behind the scenes, like they're piecing together this puzzle of our experiences. What's really interesting is that Peterson connects this to biblical stories, especially the ones from Genesis. He thinks they might be encapsulating these ancient archetypal human experiences. Like they could be a window into the fundamental patterns of human consciousness.
So these stories might be more than just stories.
Right.
They could be reflections of our deepest fears, desires, the ways that we even make sense of the world around us.
Exactly. He even uses this analogy of artists, like how they observe and represent reality. So think about how a painting can teach us to see the world in a new way, even if we can't explain exactly what we're learning from it.
Right.
Peterson, he says, and I quote, "The dream is part of the process that's watching everything and then trying to formulate it. It's trying to get the signal out from the noise and portray it in dramatic form."
So these ancient stories are kind of doing something similar, helping us to see the patterns of human behavior and the challenges we face, but in a new light.
That's the idea, yeah. And this leads us to another key concept that Peterson explores, chaos. And he doesn't just mean chaos in a literal sense, but that feeling of being overwhelmed, lost, like our world is falling apart. It's a universal human experience that we all encounter in different ways.
Yeah, everyone has those moments where life throws a curveball and you're just left drowning in uncertainty.
Right, exactly. Peterson describes it really, really vividly. He says, "Chaos is what you encounter when you're blown into pieces and thrown into deep confusion, when your world falls apart, when your dreams die, when you're betrayed." It's really powerful imagery. I think it resonates with anyone who's gone through tough times.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, Peterson points out how this concept of confronting chaos is this recurring theme in a lot of stories, not just the Bible. You think about the classic tale of St. George and the Dragon. It's a symbolic representation of overcoming a really powerful, chaotic force.
Yeah, and it's not just in stories. Even the way we depict deep disturbances or threats, we often use imagery similar to predators, like snakes or dragons. It suggests there's this deep, ancient connection between our psychological experiences and how we actually perceive danger in the world.
So facing chaos, overcoming those challenges, it's almost hardwired into our being.
Yeah.
It's part of the human story.
That's what these stories seem to suggest, yeah. And this brings us to another really crucial element, consciousness and truth. Peterson argues that our entire culture, our legal systems, they're all built on this idea that we are conscious individuals,
Right.
capable of making choices and being held accountable for our actions.
It makes sense. Our ability to understand right and wrong, to make decisions, take responsibility, it's really at the core of how we function as a society.
Exactly. And this is where the idea of the logos comes in. Peterson uses this term to describe the power of human consciousness, like its power to shape reality. It's like that force that brings order out of the chaos. He says, there's something about you that's conscious and capable of communicating, like you're a whole world unto yourself.
So our consciousness, our ability to understand and communicate, that's what sets us apart and allows us to create order in the world.
That's a big part of it, yeah. And it raises a really important question. What is truth, and how does it help us navigate the chaos of life?
That's a really deep question. I'm sure it has many answers. But I'm curious to hear how Peterson approaches it.
Well, he compares various psychological approaches from Freud to Jung and others, and he finds a common thread. They all suggest that confronting the truth, whatever that truth may be, is essential for growth and healing.
So whether it's facing our deepest fears, acknowledging our mistakes, or simply being honest with ourselves, truth plays a crucial role in shaping our lives.
Precisely. And this leads us to another powerful theme that emerges from these biblical stories, the concept of sacrifice and personal growth. Peterson argues that sacrifice is necessary for progress, both for individuals and for society as a whole.
You know, that reminds me of the story of Adam and Eve leaving the Garden of Eden. They gain knowledge, but it comes at a price, right? The introduction of work, pain, the challenges of life outside of paradise.
That's a perfect example. He also uses examples like immigrants, who make huge sacrifices for a better future, or the discipline that's required to achieve long-term goals. It's that idea of delaying gratification.
Right.
Enduring hardship in the present for something better down the line.
He has this great quote about it. He says, "Disciplined means that you're capable of making sacrifices. You're not disciplined if you just do something you want more, rather than something that you're doing." It really highlights the connection between sacrifice and achieving something meaningful.
Yeah, and sometimes those sacrifices we make, they're less about material things and more about confronting our own weaknesses or letting go of those unhealthy patterns in our lives.
So it's not always easy, but facing those challenges, making those tough choices, that's ultimately what helps us to grow.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of the most psychologically rich stories in the Bible, Cain and Abel.
Okay.
This story explores the dark side of human nature, resentment, bitterness, and the destructive consequences of unchecked negative emotions.
Cain's envy of his brother Abel and that murderous resentment that Peterson talks about, it's something we unfortunately see all the time.
Yeah.
Both in personal relationships and on a larger scale, in society.
Yeah. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of comparison, the feeling of inadequacy that can fester and lead to destructive behaviors if we don't address it in a healthy way.
It really makes you wonder how we move from the darkness of a story like that to a more hopeful perspective. How do we learn from those mistakes and find a better way?
Right. Yeah, so that's where the story of Noah and the flood kind of comes in. It's a story that's often, interpreted literally. But Peterson sees it as this metaphor for preparedness, like both practical and psychological preparedness,
So it's not just about building an actual physical ark.
Right.
But about being ready for those storms of life, the inevitable challenges that we all kind of face.
Exactly. Peterson uses the analogy of the Dutch dike system. So the Dutch, they have this really long history of dealing with floods, and they've built this incredibly elaborate system of dikes and barriers just to protect themselves, right?
Wow.
And it's a testament to their foresight and their preparedness.
It's like they've learned to anticipate chaos, to take those steps to mitigate the potential damage, even if it seems really unlikely or far off.
Precisely. And Peterson's point is that we can apply that same principle to our own lives, right? He asks this really thought-provoking question. He says, fair isn't the point. The point is, do you want to get flooded out again or not?
It's a good question. It's a reminder that we have a choice. We can either be reactive, waiting for things to happen and then, scrambling to deal with the aftermath.
Yeah.
Or we can be proactive, taking those steps to prepare ourselves mentally and emotionally for the challenges that inevitably come our way.
And that preparation, it can take many forms, right? It could be building a support network, developing coping mechanisms, or simply cultivating that mindset of resilience.
So being prepared isn't just about avoiding hardship altogether. It's about having the tools and the strength to navigate those difficult times when they do arise.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another story that offers kind of a different lesson, the Tower of Babel. This story speaks to human ambition and the potential pitfalls of overreaching.
Yeah, it's interesting how this story connects to our desire to understand societal structures and, the consequences of our actions, both as individuals and as a collective.
Peterson's take on it highlights how our ambitions, while they often drive progress and innovation, They can also lead to fragmentation and chaos if we're not careful.
So it's like this cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the importance of balancing, our individual desires with the needs of the community as a whole.
Exactly. It's a theme that's so relevant to, the complexities of our modern world, where individual ambition and technological advancements, they can sometimes outpace our ethical considerations. You know what I mean?
It makes you think about the responsibility that comes with progress, right? How important it is to consider those potential consequences of our actions, both intended and unintended.
Right. And speaking of taking responsibility for our actions, the story of Abraham is a really powerful example of someone who makes bold choices and faces difficult challenges in pursuit of a higher purpose.
Abraham is definitely a character who makes some big decisions. He leaves his homeland and even faces the ultimate test, being asked to sacrifice his son, Isaac.
It's a story that forces us to confront the nature of faith, obedience, and trust in something greater than ourselves.
And it touches on that idea of sacrifice we were discussing earlier.
Yeah.
Abraham makes profound sacrifices, demonstrating that level of commitment that's really required when you're pursuing a higher calling.
Yeah. And what's fascinating about this story is the psychological implication of God testing Abraham. It raises all these questions about the nature of our relationship with the divine, like the limits of obedience and the potential for growth through hardship.
It's definitely a story that invites deep reflection. And speaking of profound experiences, Peterson also connects the story of Jacob's ladder to the concept of shamanic experiences and their potential to provide profound insights.
That's right. Jacob's ladder can be interpreted as this symbolic representation of connecting the earthly and divine realms. And this idea of bridging different realities, it's central to shamanic practices found in many cultures throughout history.
And Peterson even delves into near-death experiences, right? Suggesting that these too can be viewed as a form of shamanic experience, offering glimpses into the transcendent or the unknown.
It's a fascinating connection. It highlights the human desire to explore the boundaries of consciousness and our place in the cosmos.
It makes you wonder if there are experiences in our lives that might offer similar glimpses into those, deeper realms, like moments of intense connection or creativity or insight that feel like they transcend the ordinary.
It's certainly something to ponder, and all of these stories, these archetypal journeys, they all seem to point to the importance of faith and truth in action. Peterson argues that true faith, it isn't just about believing, it's about acting as if what you believe is true.
So it's not enough to just say you believe in something, you actually have to live it, embody it in your actions.
Exactly. It's about aligning your beliefs with your behavior. And this kind of connects back to the power of truth that we were talking about earlier. When we strive to live in accordance with our values, it can lead to personal growth and a more positive impact on the world around us.
It's like that saying, actions speak louder than words.
Precisely. And finally, we come to the themes of forgiveness and reconciliation, which are so beautifully illustrated in the story of Joseph and his brothers.
Right.
It's a story that's resonated with people for centuries and for good reason.
Yeah, it's a story about betrayal, hardship, and ultimately the power of forgiveness to heal deep wounds. It really speaks to the human capacity for both great darkness and incredible compassion.
Peterson highlights the conditions that are necessary for true forgiveness, including genuine repentance and a commitment to change on the part of the person who has wronged you.
So it's not about simply sweeping things under the rug or condoning harmful actions. It's about acknowledging the wrongdoing, understanding the impact, and seeing a genuine effort to make amends.
Exactly. And the story of Joseph forgiving his brothers, it demonstrates the transformative power of this process, both for the individuals involved and for their relationship as a family. It shows how forgiveness can mend broken bonds and allow for a new beginning.
It's a powerful message about overcoming past hurts and rebuilding trust, which is so relevant to our personal lives. And even on a societal level, we see conflict and division everywhere, but this story reminds us that reconciliation is always possible, even in the face of great pain and betrayal. We've been on quite the journey, haven't we? Exploring the psychological depths of these biblical stories.
Yeah, it's been fascinating.
From confronting chaos to the power of forgiveness. It's amazing how these ancient narratives still have these insights that are relevant to us today.
It really highlights how they tap into something fundamental about the human experience,
Yeah.
They're not just these historical accounts or religious doctrines. They're reflections of our deepest fears and desires and the challenges that we face as we, navigate life.
It's like they're this roadmap for understanding ourselves and the world around us, even thousands of years after they were written.
Yeah, one of the key takeaways for me is that these stories, they offer a framework for understanding and confronting chaos.
Okay.
Peterson talks about how chaos is this inevitable force that disrupts our lives. It throws us into uncertainty and confusion. But these stories, like the creation myth or Noah's Ark, they provide a way to kind of make sense of that chaos, to find meaning and purpose amidst all the turmoil.
It's like they're giving us a way to navigate those turbulent waters.
Yeah.
Providing a sense of order and direction when things feel like they're falling apart.
Exactly. And that connects to another crucial point, the power of consciousness and personal responsibility. Peterson really emphasizes that we're not just passive victims of fate.
Right.
We have the capacity to make choices, to shape our reality through our thoughts and actions.
That reminds me of the story of Adam and Eve leaving the Garden of Eden. They gain knowledge, but with it comes this realization of their own agency and the responsibility that comes with making choices.
Yeah. It's such a powerful metaphor for the human condition, We're constantly striving for knowledge, for progress, but it inevitably comes with these challenges and sacrifices. And that brings us to the idea that sacrifice is essential for growth. Peterson uses examples like immigrants, leaving behind everything familiar for a better future, or the discipline that's required to achieve those long-term goals. It's that willingness to endure hardship in the present for something greater down the line.
It's easy to get caught up in the immediate gratification of our wants and desires, right?
Yeah.
But these stories, they remind us that true growth often requires us to delay gratification, to make those tough choices and sacrifices that ultimately lead to a more fulfilling life.
Absolutely. And these stories don't shy away from the darker aspects of human nature either. The story of Cain and Abel, it's a stark reminder of the destructive power of envy and resentment, emotions that can really poison our hearts and relationships.
And it's a cautionary tale that's sadly still relevant today.
Yeah.
We see it play out in families and communities, even on a global scale. When resentment and hatred fuel conflict and division, it makes you think about how we deal with those negative emotions, how we can choose a different path.
And that's why the themes of forgiveness and reconciliation are so crucial. The story of Joseph and his brothers, it shows us that even in the face of betrayal and deep hurt, healing and restoration are possible. It highlights the transformative power of forgiveness, both for the individual who forgives and the one who is forgiven.
Peterson emphasizes that true forgiveness isn't about condoning harmful actions or simply forgetting the past. It's about acknowledging the wrong, seeing genuine remorse from the person who caused harm, and making a conscious choice to move forward with compassion and understanding.
Yeah, it's a difficult process, but it's essential for both personal and collective healing. It allows us to break free from cycles of resentment and create space for growth and new beginnings.
So we've explored the depths of human psychology through these biblical stories, from the chaotic forces that shape our lives to the power of consciousness, sacrifice, and forgiveness.
Yeah.
What's the final takeaway that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
Well, for me, it's this realization that these stories, even though they're ancient, they offer timeless wisdom that can guide us through, the complexities of modern life, They remind us of the importance of confronting our shadows, taking responsibility for our actions, and striving to live in alignment with truth and meaning. Even if you don't interpret them literally or subscribe to a particular religious belief, they can still be this source of valuable insight and guidance.
It's about finding those universal truths that resonate across time and cultures. Those lessons about what it means to be human that can help us navigate those challenges and opportunities of life.
And perhaps most importantly, they offer this glimmer of hope, showing us that even in the face of hardship and betrayal, there's always the possibility of redemption and reconciliation.
That's well said. And on that note, it's time for us to wrap up this Dope Dive.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of the psychology of biblical stories. We hope you found it as insightful and thought-provoking as we have.